I'm Sean Fennessey.
I'm Amanda Dobbins.
And this is 25 for 25, a big picture special conversation show about Anchorman, the Legend of Ron Burgundy. And I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal. People know me. I'm very important. I have many leather-bound books. And my apartment smells of rich mahogany, Amanda. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about those facts?
I didn't realize until I rewatched that I had that full speech memorized. Like I could say it word for word. Very important, an important film, important text for our generation.
Yes, let's explore why that is the case, because I suspect we will be repeating a lot of lines of dialogue from this movie as we talk about it.
I love Lamp!
We do love Lamp here. This movie was released on July 9th, 2004. Special time in my life. Was living in New York City. It is co-written and directed by Adam McKay. It's his directorial debut. Right. After an incredible run at Saturday Night Live, where he formed an extraordinary partnership and bond with the other co-writer and star of this movie, Will Ferrell. It also stars Christina Applegate, Paul Rudd, Steve Carell, David Koechner, Chris Parnell, Fred Willard, cameos galore.
Yeah.
This is the beginning,
yes,
of the Apatow, McKay era of comedy,
right,
which also began to sort of suck up, hoover up, and grow a great many stars, basically for a 15-year period, I would say, roughly through 2018, 2019.
Right, and then the pandemic
kind of killed it, yeah.
And then the slap put an end to that.
Was it the slap that ended comedy?
Well, I just kind of, yeah.
Wow, the slap killed comedy.
Yeah, I guess so.
We've already made great progress here on this episode of 25 for 25. So let's talk about it. This was a tricky one to choose because there are a number of representative mega comedies from this era. There's The Hangover. There's other Ferrell McKay projects like Talladega Nights or Step Brothers. There's This Is the End. There's Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Sure.
We could go on.
Really,
and on.
the entire Apatow universe.
40-Year-Old Virgin.
Yeah.
Knocked Up. Girls Trip.
And I think the most egregious, and what was the alternative on the list for me, Superbad.
Right. So let's go there. Superbad was, I think, the leader in the clubhouse at the start. We made a couple of pivots over time.
I think we made the right decision because of everything that this movie brings together. And it is the starting point both for Apatow universe, Adam McKay universe. It brings in the tail end of like the SNL stuff. Mean Girls is another movie, spoiler, that's not on our list, but
was a contender.
Yeah, and is a SNL, figure transitioning in a different way to the big screen. So you have everything in this one movie, but Superbad's not on our list. So I feel sad about that.
I feel sad about it too. I love that movie very much. Superbad, obviously, I don't believe would be possible without this movie and without Judd Apatow. This is not the first thing Judd Apatow did by any stretch of the imagination. But I think what it showed is his great strength colliding with another great filmmaker's strength, and then making something very special and unique. Apatow had been making television and movies in the 90s, but this style of filmmaking that he pursues, which is very improv-based, which is very manic and absurdist, hitting with McKay, who had a ton of experience writing sketch and a ton of experience performing in sketch on stage. Those two energies fit together beautifully.
Right.
The other thing is that Apatow is a concept guy and McKay is an idea guy. You know what I mean when I say that?
Yes.
So, Apatow is really good at saying, like, what if this was the situation? Right. And McKay is really good at dumping thematic stuff into those
premise
concepts.
versus theme.
Exactly.
Right. So this is both a funny setup and like in a world you want to be in. And crucially, like a setup that can sustain the whole movie, where a lot of SNL to movie pivots are just an SNL sketch that we just do for sometimes 2.5 hours, which is inexplicable. But so the premise works, and then McKay is like, no, this is about, sexism and chauvinism in the 70s, and can craft the comedy correctly and make it be about something while also being funny, and also crucially edit it. So this is the other thing. I had allotted like 3 hours to rewatch this, and because in my mind it was one of the late Apatow production, like bloated forever and ever, and the improv just goes on. This movie's 90 minutes. Yep. God bless you.
It's a lean machine of comedy.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, that being said, we know that they made a lot more movie.
Totally.
There are a lot of cutscenes and bloopers. There's an extended edition that I think is 5 minutes longer, the unrated edition. And then there is also a movie that is now available called Wake Up Ron Burgundy, which is an entire other movie that they cut together that I would say has less narrative strand.
Right, sure.
But nevertheless, like, is just rippling with jokes, has got a ton of material. And this is what these guys do. They write a lot, and then they improv a lot, and then they collide it all together. This film is simultaneously feels like, I don't want to say the cheapest, but the sort of like the most fly by night, the least like hard studio movie out of this generation. You know, it's got a silliness to it, but also has kind of a really strong core at the center of it because it has real relationships between real people that is kind of keeping you invested in the story while the joke machine flies at you. So this is my favorite comedy of the century. I think it's representative of something that is great, but also to sit inside of it and watch it is just fun. Yeah.
Do you want to speak on Will Ferrell and what he means to you?
Sure. This is not the first movie that he co-wrote. He co-wrote a movie in 1998 called A Night at the Roxbury, which was based...
I can't do it. Like, which way? It's hard. Yeah.
That's it. Based on a sketch about guys in a club.
Sure.
He, Chris Kattan, and the eventual, whoever the guest was that week, Jim Carrey, famously participated in a funny Night at the Roxbury sketch where he kind of out-Roxburied Will Ferrell and Chris Kattan. That's an interesting example of what you just cited, which is that Will Ferrell, when he hit Saturday Night Live in the 90s, was a supernova. He was an instantaneous megastar. He felt like, to me, he was the heir apparent to Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy, and you could say John Belushi before him.
And to me, that's the era when I came in. So Will Ferrell is like my SNL star forever.
Yes, and that's a great stretch of SNL. Obviously, we remember it fondly because we were adolescent.
Sure.
But the Tina Fey and Amy Poehler stretch, but then there's also Jimmy Fallon, and then there's folks like Sherry O'Terry, Horatio Sands. Very, very good.
The Spartans.
Yes, and the Cheerleaders, which is one of the things that vaulted Will Ferrell to mega fame, among many other characters that he created, many of whom were created with Adam McKay. So, for me, he was an icon. He is my favorite SNL cast member, aside from Phil Hartman. Like, he was an immediate rock star, but that didn't mean that he was an immediate movie star.
And the jump has foiled many people.
It has. And I think he did some interesting things. He had a very memorable cameo in a movie that I think is a nice setup for this movie, which is Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, where he plays, I think his name is Mustafa. He culturally appropriated and was wearing, what are those hats called? The red hat with the, you know what I'm talking about?
That's not his name in Zoolander? What's his name in Zoolander?
Isn't that Mugatu?
Yes, you're right. Thank you. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, we're like edging on, it's, again, 2000s, very different.
A lot of appropriation going on. It's possible that character in Austin Powers is meant to be white, but he's informed by a certain kind of James Bond villain.
Okay.
Nevertheless, he's really, really funny in that movie, and he gets a very small role where he's like, I'm badly hurt, when he's at the bottom of the whatever trapdoor he's fallen down. But Night at the Roxbury was like a reach. It didn't work. It was what you described. It was a stretched out sketch. And he needed a vehicle that was more appropriate for how to describe his essence. I think he is the ultimate full of it man baby. He is the overconfident, idiotic representation of false masculinity.
Right.
Or
his performance. Let's not slander Will Ferrell.
Not as a man. I want to talk a little bit about him and McKay's dynamic, especially since they no longer work together.
I know, which is sad.
And what they gave to each other and kind of what they mean to each other. But I find him to be funny in a primal way. I tend to intellectualize these things and verbalize these things as much as I can.
Right.
But he has something that just makes me happy.
Yes. I mean, it is presence. There's physicality. There's what he does with his voice, and the Steve Carell performance in this is like also early Steve Carell and very funny and is like playing with volume, which I associate with Steve Carell now, but I realized watching this again, I was like, oh, okay. So that is first and foremost a Will Ferrell thing. And like, weird sounds and it's like pre-language in some ways, his level of humor.
Yeah. But then he's the Cro-Magnon comedy man.
But it speaks to us on that level.
I'm in a glass cage of emotion. Obviously him shouting just makes people laugh. Get off the shed! Like all the SNL sketches are born of him seeming calm
Right.
and then quickly losing his shit. Ron Burgundy, especially, presentational character that he is.
Sure.
He's a 1970s newscaster. I'll describe the setup of the movie for
Sure.
anybody who's not seen Anchorman, which is, I don't know who that is. Is anybody alive who hasn't seen Anchorman? Anybody at least under the age of 20 maybe hasn't seen it.
Okay.
Hotshot television anchorman Ron Burgundy welcomes upstart reporter Veronica Corningstone into the male-dominated world of 1970s broadcast news. That is until the talented female journalist begins to outshine Burgundy on air. Soon he grows jealous, begins a bitter feud with Veronica, and eventually makes a vulgar slip on live TV that ruins his career. However, when an outrageous story breaks at the San Diego Zoo, Ron may get a chance to redeem himself. So we can talk about the reasons why we added this movie to the list.
Yeah.
One is obviously the Apatow McKay collision, which kicks off an era of comedy,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The other is obviously Will Ferrell, movie star.
Right.
He goes on to make some of it. Is he the signature comedy star of the 21st century? I think is an interesting question to explore.
Right. I mean, Vince Vaughn being in this is another one because so you get Old School and Wedding Crashers very soon after that. No one from Hangover is in this. So, and those I feel are sort of like the tentpole.
Mm-hmm. Those are the
at
big
least
box
of
office
the
sensations.
First 10 years,
Yes.
right? But to us, probably because Will Ferrell's also in Old School.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we have? I mean, Step Brothers.
Mm-hmm. Step Brothers is the only other one besides Superbad that I seriously considered.
No, I mean, I also, when we were doing our Devil's Advocate, I was like, are we sure it shouldn't be Step Brothers instead of Anchorman? And I think that you have to be a little boring when you're making those lists.
Mm-hmm.
Like Anchorman brings together all the themes and everything we're talking about, and Step Brothers is just like it is like performance art. It is like avant-garde almost.
It is,
but is really, really, really funny.
I love it. We did a rewatchals about it many, many years ago. I don't want to say there's less to talk about with Step Brothers, and that being the reason why we didn't choose it, but it does feel like you are watching a live exhibit of some kind,
right?
You know, like them kind of like going to the absolute ends of their quest for the like lost masculinity of the American man in the 21st century, as opposed to a movie like this, which actually is maybe just like a little bit thematically richer. Plus, this movie also has Christina Applegate, which is the kind of performance that we definitely do not have in Step Brothers. There's not a lot of female depth explored.
It's true.
There were a couple of other movies that I considered. 21 Jump Street, which I think is very, very well liked.
Really, really funny.
And
by me as well.
Yeah.
So.
And we have like Jonah Hill is not represented here, neither Superbad nor 21 Jump Street. Once upon a time, he was a huge comedy star.
It's okay. No spoilers, but Jonah will be back.
He will be back. Tropic Thunder.
Yeah. This one,
not a big one for you?
No.
Okay.
I know its importance.
But as a fan of
and Tom
movie
Cruise
documentaries,
sure, yeah.
Tom Cruise.
I mean, it's
inspired by Hearts of Darkness.
Wasn't there at that time. Like, it's good, but it's not on the level of really any of, and it's not like culturally significant in the way that Anchorman, Superbad, Knocked Up, Hangover, like those were really at the center of pop culture for a while.
They felt to me, forgive this comparison because it's going to annoy you, but they felt to me what it was like to go to Marvel movies in like the late 2010s.
I get it.
Where it was like Friday night is a party. Everyone knows when the movie's coming out and they're excited and it is loud in the theater with laughter.
And they also, like, we had like so many like discussions and think pieces about, like, is Knocked Up sexist and like all these sorts of things. Like the fan culture was different, but the fan culture was applied to these movies.
It was.
And now is to Marvel.
These were very bro-y and very white movies. There's no doubt about it. And they received a lot of criticism in the aftermath of their success. The same way that basically like every generation of comedy bro gets their criticism. This one's interesting to me though, because it's an open acknowledgement of the quote unquote problem with these movies, with culture, with American life.
It's one of the best things about it. It's like a very nifty comedic, like not even trick. I think it takes a lot of work. They are the men, the sexist buffoons, like they are the topic of the joke, but they are also the butt of the joke.
Yes.
And so quickly and in any other hands you would be asked to laugh at their sexist jokes, you know, and that would be the thing that that is supposed to be quote unquote funny. And somehow in this movie, they are being gross, and it is a send up of 70s, like, and just general chauvinist culture. But like the joke is always on them. And that's really hard to do.
I agree. I think it would not work without Ferrell at the center of it.
Yeah.
You know, without somebody who basically is comfortable being the butt of the joke, but who has his physique and is willing to have his shirt off all the time. You know what I mean? Who is willing to have an erection in a sequence and be the, you know, object of embarrassment.
Right.
I mean, I agree with you that it's like a very effective idea movie in that way. I think it's also like ensembles are hard to do in comedy, and a lot of movies try to ape this. And this is a collection of people who, like, even if they didn't work together a lot after this, all were kind of destined to be in a movie together in some ways. Like, Paul Rudd had been in comedies before this, but not quite like this.
No, not like Sex Panther.
Not in this register specifically.
Sex Panther is the part of the movie when Zach, who was eager to watch this one with me,
I'm sure,
was just like speechless, convulsed, you know? Just like literally like couldn't breathe.
60% of the time it works every time. I think the other thing too is that it's in a really great tradition of movies like Airplane, like Mel Brooks movies, like the Marx Brothers, like Jerry Lewis, where it's just like joke. You don't get to go more than 90 seconds, even if something incredibly dramatic has just happened, without getting hit with a joke.
Yeah. Which
I actually don't know how that has aged, for lack of a better word. I don't know if that brand of comedy, obviously we like our consumption patterns, the way we use our phones and the way we like look at TikTok, for example, works in the same way, but not in sustained spaces. Like we've been lamenting the loss of the studio comedy for 10 years now.
Yeah.
And the like people laughing over a joke in a movie theater thing. You must remember this as like an issue, especially for a movie like this that is so loaded.
Yes. But I mean, it just is kind of like rolling, and in the movie theater, it's so loud that, you know, it just keeps going and it builds also. What's interesting to me about it is you mentioned that there are like actual relationships between people and ideas in this, but the comedy like never stops to have a moment of like, you know, what is Veronica like gonna, you know, what's she gonna do, and how does it must be really hard to, that's all in the movie, but she's also making fun of herself, or the movie is,
she's playing the comedy of it. Totally.
Yeah, exactly. And the movie is playing the comedy of it, and it does somehow manage to, you know, it's like, it's funny that they're so hot for each other, and that is like part of the joke. So you don't have to go into some like actual emotional development that's believable. I don't really know whether movie audiences allow for that anymore in the same way.
It's a good question. I wonder, because
I wish they would. I think you and I would, but like, you know, all our like Marxist materialist girls, I don't know.
Well, if
you know what I'm saying?
I do. We can't make movies based on that though. Like, I feel like oddly, this movie has more respect for its audience because it doesn't pretend to have this like false dramatic sense of urgency.
Agree, but you know, I do think people expect a speech where like the moral, like, and the like is read aloud to them.
Yeah, it's just not necessary because, for example, let's take the scene when Veronica arrives into San Diego and she doesn't know the town well. She's just come in from a different place where she had been working as a newscaster. And Ron wants to take her out on a date, but he's using it as a sort of like, let me show you around the town. And he takes her to the Overlook where you would presumably make out with someone. And he delivers this famous San Diego, you know, founded by the Germans in you don't, once you have that scene where she's smarter than him, you know, whale's vagina, all that stuff, it kind of eradicates the necessity of any overwritten speech about what this movie is really about. It's like, this guy's a fucking buffoon. He's kind of at the absolute core kind of sweet. You know, like he loves
his dog.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
He loves his dog.
And as you know, I have a complicated relationship with the deployment of animals and pets in movies, but this is perfectly done.
Yeah.
And also funny.
Well, the real dramatic hinge of the movie is not Veronica versus Ron. It's Ron throwing a burrito at Jack Black on a motorcycle, Jack Black skidding out, and then going over to Ron First of all, Jack Black's character asking Ron, "What do you love?" and Ron's immediate response is, "I love poetry." It always gets me. But then him grabbing Baxter, his little dog, and punting him off of the side of a bridge, and then that sending Ron into a tailspin, which then disallows him from reading the news that day.
Sure.
That being the narrative crux of the movie is fucking hilarious.
And then also setting up the final resolution of the movie, which is Baxter, bless him, still alive and can speak bear and comes to save them from this.
It's an amazing movie.
Even like the bear and dog dialogue in Hotel is so funny.
It is truly ridiculous.
I will tell tales of your like compassion or whatever.
We all live in the animal kingdom, you know?
It's really funny.
If you want to throw down fisticuffs, fine. I've got Jack Johnson and Tom O'Leary waiting for you right here. It's rare that a movie from this century for me can conjure the desire to just say movie dialogue.
Yeah.
The men saying movie dialogue together, and I'm not gender essentializing, I'm merely speaking of my experiences.
Yeah.
Is just that is a love language, a friendship.
Of course.
That is a way to communicate with your boys.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have it as much anymore. Now, there are like a million reasons for it. We don't have as many comedies. I live in a house with 2 women and not my boys anymore.
Yeah.
I am in my 40s and that would seem a little bit ridiculous. Although I found myself in Atlanta with my brother and we shared a room in a hotel.
That's very cute.
And we just said Big Lebowski dialogue to each other the whole time.
That's really nice.
So,
yeah.
You know, that it's still, it's buried deep, but it's still there.
I always like try to do that, but there's no one else who has my references, you know? It's like,
so where do you go?
You know, like no one, you know, everywhere in LA is 20 minutes. What's that from?
I know where that's from.
Yeah, see, there we go. It's done.
Yeah.
You know? But
what
it's like Clueless. Come on.
Yeah,
but I have like a lot of, I have things that are either it's basically You've Got Mail or Clueless that I repeat as if everybody would know it.
You need more Clueless gal pals.
I know.
Clueless is a very popular film.
I do know that, but it's not wired in us to be speaking the same way.
You might just be stuck working at the Ringer.
Yes, I know.
It's kind of an issue.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Talk to me about Christina Applegate before, because I feel like she's come up in the past and you've been like, a little bit, like she's not my favorite, but I feel like this is...
That's unfair.
Okay, tell me.
I don't know. I guess that this is probably my number one connection because I Married with Children was not in... Well, we just didn't watch it growing up. She's fantastic in this. She's
amazing.
Really, really funny. And like Veronica has a very hard job of hanging with, 45 men. She is like in this the script in the movie has like a lot more love for her and wants to help her, but it's like you have to play the sexist interloper, like you got to get it just right. And she does. She's hilarious. She's lit so beautifully. I just want to say that whoever did that and did a really good job.
She looks
and like
gorgeous,
even when that first scene when they're cutting at the party, when they're cutting between her and Ferrell, I'm like, okay, so we have different setups here.
Yes. He doesn't get the same lighting treatment.
Yeah, which is I think purposeful and adds to the text, but she looks great. I think it must be really I mean, comedy is hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think comedy is hard. Also, these people all the men have worked together or have some sort of like training together, and she's coming in. So hats off to her. It's really good.
There's not a lot of female comedy actresses that have her bona fides, her experience.
Yeah.
She obviously, I think she's a bit underrated in that she comes from a tradition of like Carole Lombard, Marilyn Monroe, the stunning blonde.
Yes.
Who can hang with the boys, so to speak, who's just as funny, funny as all of them. And I think this movie for a certain generation of guys, maybe just a little bit younger than me, is like the first time that they ever saw her. But it wasn't just Married with Children. It was like Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. It was Sweetest Thing. It was like there were a bunch of movies that were happening in the 90s and the 2000s where she was the lead of the movie. Right. She was the lead of movies when she was like 20 years old. So she's an old hand, so to speak. And she's also like won an Emmy, Golden Globes, Tonys. Like she's extremely accomplished. She's not as much in the culture because she was diagnosed with MS, and so she doesn't perform nearly as much as she used to. But I think her character is pretty well written because it also she doesn't take herself too seriously. Like very early on in the film, she gets to do voiceover, which shifts the perspective pretty dramatically in the movie. And then she says, this is definitely a man's world, but while they're laughing and grab-assing, I'm chasing down leads and practicing my non-regional diction.
It's fun.
You know, like there's like a recognition of the fact that she also is like kind of an insecure hustler, just like all these other guys. So as much as the movie is about the fragility of the male psyche, even in the 1970s when men ran everything, it's also about her own vulnerability, fragility.
I even think that the scene, like the end of their night out, when she is like desperately attracted to him and is like, but I never mix professional and something, like she is playing that as a parody of that type of woman who's been in that situation before and is, like, and she's also like weak and can't help it. So it's very funny.
The rest of the cast is a pretty amazing collection of people who are great with like 3 shots a night. Yeah. You know, Fred Willard in a kind of a glory third generation. He's already smoking the Christopher Guest movies by this point after all of his years in comedy. It's one of the first times I can remember seeing Catherine Hahn.
Oh, interesting. This is 2004, so you wouldn't have seen How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days before this.
I probably did.
Okay. Well, she is a very vital and memorable.
Is she best friend?
She's the one who keeps doing everything wrong. And so, and she's like calling and crying and being like, I showed up at his door after 1 coffee.
Are you surprised at all that Catherine Hahn has emerged as an icon?
No, I get it. I love her. Yeah. She's,
her funniest performance to me is in Step Brothers. That's where she's at her best.
But I like that she gets to do other things now. And I'm very drawn to her. I mean, never forget her performance on the Bill Simmons podcast where she read her husband's letter. That was
elite stuff.
That's a comedy icon.
She's an excellent podcast guest as well.
She's also in the meme. Is it she staring at Rachel Weisz like very lovingly during one of the roundtables?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's
you relate to that.
I really relate to that. But so, listen, she has range.
Yeah,
she has longevity. I have been with Catherine Hahn since the beginning.
You mentioned Carell. The Office was on at this time, was it not? I'm trying to think. What year did the American Office launch?
American sitcom. 2005. So no, this was before. Yeah. So this would have been Daily Show. And he was familiar.
Interesting.
But not before. This is before Office and before 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Well, thank you for saying The Daily Show, because that's also an important part of this is the fake news as an idea. And and that's something that obviously SNL had been doing for years with Weekend Update. But that being a part of the culture and also at a time, even though this movie, I would not say is overtly politically about America in 2004.
Right.
This era of everyone in charge is a fucking moron.
Yes.
Which then would go on to become kind of definitional to what Adam McKay's movies were. It being steeped in that without being about that, I think also hugely helps the movie.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about McKay a little bit. He's been on the show a couple times. I really like Adam's movies. I think he has taken a turn in the culture.
Sure.
Where he takes more blows than he used to.
Yeah. Well, if you're tweeting about the politics of Wicked, once again, everybody that we've just talked about, Apatow, Adam McKay, just you hit Twitter, you post too much, and then things fall apart.
That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. I think if you don't, and obviously I think both of those guys would say, it's my duty to speak out about what I think is wrong in the world. Yeah. But I think most people in the world perceive their duty to be to entertain them. And there's a tension there.
Yeah.
I think Adam as a filmmaker, the more he's gotten interested in his ideas and less interested in the comedy, people have been a little bit confused as kind of like what he wants, what he's going for. Does he want to be strictly an ideologue? Does he want to be somebody who thinks entertainment first? Him and Ferrell were very, very special together.
Right.
And, there's some suggestion that the Winning Time series was where things got a little bit fractured between them. They obviously had a company together for many years.
Right.
Gary Sanchez Productions, which produced a ton of really funny movies. They're still like the Gloria Sanchez arm of the company. They're still producing stuff, but not necessarily in tandem the way that they used to. But
remember The Landlord?
Yeah, I mean that digital comedy, the online viral comedy thing.
Give me my money.
They helped launch that. Was that Adam's daughter?
I think so. Yes. Yeah.
They
It's really fun.
There is a long tradition of the kind of like festering, angry comedy writer at SNL going all the way back to Michael O'Donoghue, powering the dopey tall guy, the Chevy Chases of the world, and making them an avatar for the idiocy of the world at large. One of the key roles that Ferrell played when he was on the show was George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
George W. Bush is a target of Anchorman.
Yeah.
He is the kind of person that this movie is about.
And modeled, and maybe not the look specifically, but certainly the affect, the staring into the camera, and we'll say whatever's on the prompter and won't even think about it.
Yes. Yeah, and the overconfidence in the communication of information that is probably false.
Right.
Believe
diversity.
I was just looking for that one. That's my favorite. I could be wrong, but I believe diversity is an old wooden ship that was used during the Civil War era. Why would wooden ships be used during the Civil War? It's not unexamined. I think all of that stuff, the fact that McKay is able to make that stuff, to make us think about it without having to say it, is one of the great powers of the movie and one of the reasons why I like it so much. I'm very curious where his career goes. I'm very curious what kind of movies he makes. Don't Look Up, as much kind of slings and arrows as it took, is one of the most successful movies in the history of Netflix.
Yeah.
So it's not as though like he has become an obscure filmmaker, because he's not at all. And he's had success in TV too. He was going to make that movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Robert Pattinson, I think, about an assassination. Do you remember this? The thing got canceled.
Oh, it got canceled?
Yeah, they killed it. I think it was going to be a Netflix movie and they killed
sad.
it. Yeah, so I actually don't know what he's doing next. Okay. But the arc of his career is really interesting because it was just, it pressed the limits of absurdity. And then I find that The Other Guys is the turning point, because The Other Guys is basically about the financial crisis and the absurdity of the banking system in this country and the way that wealth and capital operates. And the first time you saw it, you were like, I think this is actually about something different than Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell being, silly partners together.
Right.
And then the second time you watch it, you're like, oh man, this is like a manifesto of some kind. And then every other movie since has been kind of a manifesto.
Right.
This is still my favorite of his films.
I think so. Yeah, I think this is number one. Step Brothers up there. I really like The Big Short. Big Short gets the combination of manifesto and ensemble and funny moments and just like trying stuff, right? And then
it is kind of structurally audacious,
right?
Yeah.
Margot Robbie in the bathtub, like the first time, is amusing, And then
you can feel that stuff in this movie. The big fight sequence in this movie where all the news teams go to war with each other is the kind of like record scratch, we're going to a different kind of movie feeling, which I love that stuff. I love the ability to like break form the way that he does over and over again. So that's a really cool thing that he does. Will Ferrell.
Yeah.
Now, Elf came before this. And Old School came before this.
Old School was before this?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So he's already done, by the time this movie comes around, not just Austin Powers and...
Old School is 2003? Wow.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense because I watched it about 8,000 times in college.
I saw it not too long ago and still laughed really hard.
Maybe Bed Bath & Beyond, Nice Little Saturday. Like, I think about that every single Saturday.
To me, Vince Vaughn is the best part of that movie, though.
Yeah, I agree.
He is the one who is the, like...
Yes.
He is truly trapped emotionally.
Yeah.
He's the one who doesn't really... is having a harder time coming to grips. Will Ferrell is like, he just got married and is confused.
Right.
Vince Vaughn has a family.
He's Frank the Tank. He's just like running naked,
Yes. He's the Belushi for sure. But, Elf was a massive hit. And
Elf, not on our list. Sorry to anyone who's...
I didn't even consider it.
It does locate something about Ferrell's comedy. It is...
Overgrown child.
Overgrown, fantastical child who doesn't understand how this world works. But there is also still something sweet about the difference between Ferrell and Chevy Chase is that Chevy Chase is an asshole and which can be very funny. And Will Ferrell has something ultimately harmless, if ridiculous, about him.
Yeah. I'm looking at his movies since The Other Guys, which was in 2010. And there's some really funny stuff. But there's nothing that really got close to that.
No.
And a lot of successful movies, Daddy's Home and the Lego movie he's a big part of. And there was, of course, Anchorman 2.
Sure.
Which I didn't revisit for this conversation Though I think I remember liking more than the consensus, which was that it was kind of like a bloated, been there, done that.
Right.
But to me was also a very pointed political text about the rise of cable news and the way that cable news like infests people's minds. That, you know, that movie was made in 2013 and like look at us now.
Yeah.
Where we are trapped inside the pain cave of disinformation.
I can't even.
But I think you could make the case that not only is 2004 the pinnacle of his comedy powers, but it's also the pinnacle of him and McKay working together, and that we talked about this with Alex Garland and Danny Boyle.
Right.
That some creative people find each other and they just make each other better.
Yeah.
And
it's Lennon and McCartney.
Very much. And I really feel that with McKay and Ferrell. And I really hope that they will one day get back together and make another movie. I think they're very special together. And honestly, what could be, I don't know if they need to go back to Ron Burgundy per se, but what could be better than like men in their 50s kind of looking at what men in their 50s have done to the world, but in not such an obvious way.
Also, would that put Ron Burgundy in Reagan's 80s?
I think that's what 2 is about.
Two is still in the 80s?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's 90s.
No, it's like late 80s.
Late 80s.
Yeah, it's
90s.
like late 80s.
Yeah.
What else? Where else should we go from here? I mean, this movie was not a huge box office success. It did okay.
Yeah.
And then it was an all-time DVD classic.
Yes.
Everybody I knew on this movie.
Exactly. Yeah. And watched it 1,100 times in college.
You know, Ebert only gave it 3 stars.
Okay.
A.O. Scott basically gave it 3 stars.
Well, you know, they don't give out stars.
It wasn't hailed.
I don't. Comedies are seldom understood in their time.
So
you know,
I've talked about this
like
a lot
Picasso.
on the rewatchables. Let's talk about this because
was Picasso celebrated in his time?
Yes, he absolutely was.
Then what was
he was very famous and wealthy.
Sure, that's true. Yeah, and lots of wives. Then who am I thinking of? Whatever.
Vincent Van Gogh.
Okay,
obviously famously,
that's right. That's what I meant. Sure. Yeah.
Took that year, made himself a legend, died, you know, never to be heard from again, except we all want to pay $38 million for his
Did you
little
read
drawings.
that James Fry piece, you know, where he just like owns Picassos? Whatever, different conversation.
I absolutely did not read that piece, but we can talk about it off mic.
I'm just kind of like, where plagiarism leads to whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that being infamous,
I guess
has its power.
Okay,
I think. I don't know how to get back on track with
Well,
Anchorman.
I mean, you know, the confident men who put themselves out there,
done,
and then and reap the benefits, I guess.
Yeah, I think the thing I was trying to think about was critics are usually roughly our age. The sort of like leading critics of the time are usually in their 40s and 50s when they have reached the place where they become the authority that you go to.
Right.
This is not a movie that if I saw it today, I would understand or build the same relationship to as I did when I was 22.
Right.
Because I've lost a kind of adolescent joy that still existed. And I've often used this to explain the appeal to people my age of Adam Sandler, which is when you were 14 or 18 when Happy Gilmore or Billy Madison came out, or Tommy Boy for Chris Farley, like that generation that is right before Will Ferrell. If you were a 48-year-old man working at a local newspaper in Iowa and you watched Chris Farley, I could understand saying like, I get it, but this isn't really a very good movie.
Right, I'm not laughing out loud.
Yes. Yeah. Or even if it made me laugh, it isn't a great film. Anchorman to me is unusual in that it is actually a great film, even if it is not athletic or
right. Well, there are different, you know, there are a lot of different ways to make a great film, and we can reward a lot of different things, and we are trying to reward a lot of different things on this list, which is one thing I wanted to ask you and just kind of put out there is like, why can we only have one comedy on the list? You know,
well, we could have done whatever we wanted,
right? But we chose to.
We have
and
something's got to give.
One.
That's a comedy.
Sure, but it's like a different, you know, it's a different type of filmmaking that is more, I guess, like script and character and production design.
Those two movies, though, I think this is notable, and not true of all the movies we could have put on, are both about the complicated attempt of men and women to communicate with each other.
Sure.
Which is a theme of this show.
Right. Yes. But so there are things that we respond to, but there are a lot of different ways to put the pieces together, right? So, and a lot of different ways to make something great. So this is, I think, obviously like the performances and the improv contribute to a lot of it, but a very fine line to walk in terms of script and ideas. And like it could go very wrong and could be very gross, but instead it is absolutely seared into all of our brains because it's the funniest thing alive.
Yeah. And has a tinge of sweetness.
Yeah.
You know, it's not an acid burn movie, whereas I feel like a lot of the movies, you know, The Hangover is like kind of a mean-spirited movie.
Yes.
It's to me still very funny. There are jokes now that don't feel sensitive to 2025 or what have you, but it still has that kind of like electric energy that when Todd Phillips is at his best, I think he brings to the table. But it's nasty. It's made by somebody who's like, fuck everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's an asshole. And including the stars of my movie. These guys are assholes. Anchorman knows these guys are really, really fucked up, but they're not like David Koechner, for example, in this movie as Champ Kind, the sportscaster. I think he's really, really funny. He has one scene in particular where they're talking about the pancake breakfast that they have every month. And he and Ron and Brian Fantana, Paul Rudd's character, are talking. And Champ realizes that Ron is starting to drift away from him a little bit and drift away from the boys because he's falling in love with Veronica. And he just starts saying how he feels, which is that he wants to be close to him and he wants to get an apartment with him because he loves him. He loves his friend and maybe loves him even more than that.
Right,
maybe he's got something going on underneath that he hasn't totally reckoned with because of this huge performance of masculinity. And it's like kind of sad and weird, but kind of sweet. You know, there's something underneath Champ Kind.
It's not ugly.
It's not ugly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
He's not beating the shit out of Ron because of his own self-hatred about how he feels about Ron, which is a theme you can find in many films in the early 2000s. That was also as like kind of a rise in much more sensitive LGBTQ filmmaking was hitting Hollywood. You know, this movie is also kind of exploring that. Yeah. There is like a how the boys are quality to this movie that is very, very funny. So I'm happy it's here. I don't really have an excuse for why it's the only comedy. There are funny aspects of other movies we're doing in the future.
I think that the comedy is essential to most of the other movies.
Yeah. Even in the top 5, I can think of at least 3 movies that are very, very funny.
So it's more just, this is like the formal comedy and the studio comedy. And we had other things that we wanted to honor. But when you think of all the movies that aren't on the list, it does feel a little stupid. It's not stupid, but it's just kind of, it's a tough list of movies that didn't make the cut.
Can they come back?
Can they come back
studio
on the
comedies?
List? Oh, studio comedies? I don't know, because you made a good point about how it's the 22-year-olds who the young people who have a kind of fantastic, essential response to it that makes it. And young people do go to movies sort of, but I don't think they expect it in this format anymore, right? They have other formats for comedy.
We are just like a month away from The Naked Gun.
Sure.
Which I think obviously is very different because it is based on it's a reboot of an older comedy IP, but it's going for the same energy that we're describing, which is it's a studio theatrically released movie with stars that has Jokum in it.
Right.
And obviously I thought the trailer was really funny. We saw it together, but it seems like people are kind of into it.
Sure. No, I think that's true. But like I sat between you and Matt Bellany and had a great time and you were both chuckling, but like you guys ain't 22. You know what I'm saying?
Great point. It's a great point. I have all my 22-year-olds. Jack Sanders, you gonna go see The Naked Gun?
I will. I wouldn't say I'm like dying to see it, but I will see it.
Jesus Christ, Jack. Help me out here, buddy. Recommend it if you like.
Yeah.
Everybody's seen this movie. This is not Melancholia. You know what I mean? This is not one where people are like, oh, I've been meaning to check that out. Dumb and Dumber, Austin Powers.
Yeah.
Are obvious, right? Caddyshack, Airplane.
Sure.
Those are obvious.
Yeah.
History of the World Part 1.
I don't know what that is.
That's a Mel Brooks movie.
Oh,
I think a lot of those Mel Brooks movies, Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, on and on and on. Superbad.
Sure.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But then I think also Network.
It's a good call.
If you like Network, which I think is hilarious. We've just seen a film that reminded me a lot of Network.
Yeah,
just absolutely. Last night. This kind of like the chaos.
Network is hilarious, but it's not funny. It's a different.
Only you know me in a movie theater though, and I'm happy to be the only person laughing at a scene. Like it is that same energy. Anchorman is like we're all laughing together.
Right. No, I think Network is like I'm laughing because I'm horrified, sort of.
Yes.
But that's fine.
As Ron Burgundy would say, sure, I'm not even mad. That's amazing.
I do think that, and obviously they both take place in newsrooms in the 70s.
Exactly my point.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And
sure.
About the incursion of corporate influence on our lives,
right. And I would
women in the newsroom.
Christina Applegate's styling is not unlike Faye Dunaway's.
That's right. Diana Christensen.
Yeah.
They're very similar. In fact, I would be stunned if that was not a reference.
I think it is definitely. Especially that first white pantsuit is absolutely a Faye
100%
reference. The hair. Good. If you got a reference, that's a good one.
I just can't get so many words from this movie out of my head.
Okay.
Words that we'd never heard together.
Yeah.
Like Panda Watch. Like I just no one had ever said those words together. They say them all the time now on the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. It's an ongoing bit that they have. Great Odin's Raven, There's
course.
Just a lot of Will stuff. Will just saying things out loud. I'd love to know. I'd like to see the original shooting script.
And how much of that is kind of pre-engineered versus off the top of his head?
Yes.
You got to figure that there were like a lot of alts for Great Odin's Raven,
100%. They're probably shooting many of those.
And I'm sure they're very funny.
The opening sequence of the film where we watch Ron Burgundy warming up and doing his vocal exercises. Yeah. It just almost feels like, I've never really quite seen it before. It almost feels like the blooper reel before the movie starts where he's kind of working on it. He's like, lanolin? Like sheep's wool? The Human Torch was denied a bank loan. There's like so many of those gags that feel very written, but it also feels like there's a really smart person behind the camera just saying phrases out loud fast.
But to me, it almost feels like it, they get him in hair and makeup and they put him behind the desk and they're just like, start talking.
Just go.
Or it's like free association. Yeah. Or they're just like, they throw out a word and then he starts going.
Why do you not do vocal exercises before our recordings? Have you considered that? What would you do?
No.
What syllables do you struggle with?
R's. As you know, yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
Well, Trolls World Tour is just but that's like rural juror,
Yeah.
Which
How
is
do we
30 Rock. Yeah.
How do we get you doing
R's are really,
R's?
I'm very American. It's really tough.
Okay.
And I've like worked on it for many years.
You can't do foreign.
I mean, I
dialects.
can, but it's always like, you don't want to be the person being like, croissant,
Why not?
Because
what would be wrong with that?
Really obnoxious.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't have just like the natural in between R.
I gotta think. I don't really struggle with too much. Diction is not an issue for me.
Okay.
That's my one thing. As I told you, I once trained a classroom of 6th graders on how to be a game show host. This is something part of the reason why I like this movie is because the puffery of Ron is, that's the small part of my character.
Okay.
The puffery of whatever this is that we're doing here together. Some quick data points here. Ron Burgundy was ranked the 16th best movie character of all time in a 2020 poll by Empire.
Okay.
Seems pretty high, actually, in the history of movies. Some recency bias there, perhaps. Rolling Stone ranked it as the 13th best 21st century comedy. That's shocking.
All right.
Shocking.
Is that high or low? Shocking.
Way too low. 13?
Yeah. I mean, I agree.
IndieWire said it was the 7th best.
Yeah.
And as I said it was number 1 on the
I think
September
I read
30th.
that IndieWire list and like Along Came Polly was in the top 10, which I understand because that's Philip Seymour Hoffman.
He's amazing in it, but the movie's just okay.
I would agree. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
You
got to know context. Our list is the only list for us.
You are having some doubts about the next movie on our list.
Yeah, I noticed that you didn't respond to my text message.
Well, I thought I would be seeing you very shortly,
Okay.
and here I am with you. I have no doubts. I understand the other movie that you're trying to get on. Is there another place to get it on? You just might have to have a blood sacrifice if you want to get it on. That's the thing you got to think about.
I am having a blood sacrifice, and I want to sacrifice the next movie.
No, that's not a blood sacrifice for you.
The next movie has been a point of discussion, contention, doubt, recrimination, complication, both for this project and on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
It's great programming for an episode. right? Because we'll have a very wide-ranging conversation.
It could be like an hour and a half.
But, oh my God. Yeah.
But not just about the movie, because of all of the components
right.
of the movie.
No, I think you're right. Well, but also about all of the other movies why it's that particular movie and not 15 other movies.
Correct.
And why it was so difficult for us to make this decision. I looked at the list and I still think that I think the next one's the weakest spot.
Okay.
But, it's a group project, I guess.
I think there are some other folks out in the world who might say that some of the other films are weaker.
Well,
and the films to come could even be weaker.
They are once again invited to make their own lists and their own podcasts.
Well, they're doing that at the New York Times now.
I know. It's a great project.
Yeah,
I just want to say thank you to Sofia Coppola for putting Michael Haneke's The White Ribbon on her personal top 10. My dad is thrilled.
I'm thrilled, as always, a woman of taste. I think we should go out this way. Well, all of us here at The Big Picture, I'm Sean Fennessey. You stay classy, San Diego.
Thanks for stopping by.
But mainly, stay classy.
Thanks for stopping by.
Stay classy. I'm Sean Fennessey.
Thanks for stopping by.
Stay classy. Sean Fennessey.